The Falari had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 3,000 years, and in all that time they had never once known defeat. They were beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, with sleek fur that shifted colors depending on their mood, with eyes that could see in complete darkness, with claws that could slice through metal as easily as flesh. Their homeworld was a place of eternal twilight, a planet orbiting a dim red star where only the strong survived and the weak became food. Evolution had shaped them into perfect hunters, and they had carried that hunger for dominance into the stars. General Vexinar of the 3rd Claw Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched another world learn. The species below had called themselves the Vortani, and they had been brave in their own way, fighting back against the Falari invasion with everything they had. It had not been enough. It was never enough. Vexinar's fur rippled with satisfaction as he watched the orbital bombardment reduce their cities to ash, and he thought about what trophy he would take from this conquest. He had a collection in his private quarters, souvenirs from 11 different worlds he had personally subjugated, a skull from the Drethian Rebellion, a religious icon from the temples of Mora 7, the crown of the last king of the Yantari people. Each item reminded him of his greatness, and each item reminded the universe of what happened to those who defied the Falari. Dominion, his second-in-command, approached with the careful deference that Vexinar demanded from all who served under him. General, the High Pride has sent new orders. Vexinar did not turn from the viewport where flames painted the darkness below. Speak. Our scouts have discovered a new species in the outer spiral arm, a primitive civilization that has only recently begun exploring beyond their home system. Now Vexinar turned, and his eyes narrowed with interest. How primitive. They call themselves humans, General, and our assessment classifies them as Category 7. Category 7 was the lowest classification, reserved for species so underdeveloped that they pose no threat whatsoever. Vexinar allowed himself a low, rumbling purr of amusement. Tell me about them. His second pulled up the holographic display, and images of the humans appeared before them. Vexinar studied the creatures with growing contempt. They were soft and hairless for the most part, with flat faces and dull eyes that could barely see in low light. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. Their bodies were fragile things that could be broken with a single swipe. They have no unified government. His second continued. Their planet is divided into competing nations that constantly fight among themselves over resources and ideology, and they have only established a few small colonies on their nearest moon and neighboring planet. Pathetic, Vexinar said. Though he was already planning his approach, even the weakest species could provide something useful, whether as laborers, as experimental subjects, or simply as another trophy for his collection. The High Pride has authorized first contact and potential integration into the Dominion, and they have requested that you personally oversee the operation. Of course, they had Vexinar was the finest general of his generation, the conqueror of 11 worlds, the blade of the Falari Dominion. If anyone was to bring these humans to heel, it would be him. Set course for their homeworld, he ordered. We will show them the mercy of swift surrender or the agony of prolonged resistance. And I suspect they will be wise enough to choose mercy. As his fleet turned toward the distant star called Sol, Vexinar had no doubt about how this would end. He had seen it play out dozens of times before. First there would be disbelief as the primitive species realized they were not alone in the universe. Then there would be fear as they understood the power arrayed against them. Then there would be desperate negotiations, pathetic attempts to bargain for better terms, and finally there would be submission, the inevitable bowing of the weak before the strong. It was the natural order of things. It was the way the universe worked. The strong conquered and the weak served. and no force in existence could change that fundamental truth. What Vexenar did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was that he was operating on incomplete information. The Falari scouts had been thorough in their assessment of human technology and military capability. They had cataloged the primitive spacecraft, the chemical rockets, the nuclear weapons that could barely scratch the surface of a Falari cruiser. They had noted the divided governments, the petty conflicts, the apparent inability of humans to work together for any common purpose. What they had not noticed were the things that were hidden. They had not noticed the sensor shadows in the outer reaches of the human solar system, shadows that moved in ways that natural objects should not move. They had not noticed the strange readings coming from beneath the surfaces of certain moons and asteroids, readings that suggested construction on a massive scale. They had not noticed that every time a Falari probe got too close to certain areas, it experienced unexpected malfunctions and had to be recalled. The humans had been watching the stars for a very long time. They picked up the first Falari transmissions nearly 2 centuries ago, and they had begun preparing from that moment forward. They had seen what the Falari did to other species. They had studied the wreckage of conquered civilizations. They had learned from the mistakes of those who had trusted in the mercy of predators, and they had decided, with the quiet determination that defined their species at its best, that they would never allow themselves to become victims. So they had hidden their true capabilities. They had played the role of the primitive newcomers, stumbling around in their chemical rockets, fighting their theatrical wars, pretending to be exactly what the Falari expected them to be. They had built in secret in the dark places between worlds, in dimensions that the Falari had never discovered. They had waited with a patience that predators could never understand, the patience of creatures who had once been prey and had learned that survival required more than strength. It required cunning. It required sacrifice. It required the willingness to appear weak while building the power to ensure that weakness would never be exploited. General Vexenar stood on his bridge and dreamed of easy conquest as his fleet traveled toward Earth. He imagined the terror in human eyes when they saw his warships. He imagined their leaders begging for mercy on their knees. He imagined adding a new trophy to his collection, perhaps the weapon of their finest warrior or the symbol of their most powerful nation. He imagined all of this, and none of it would come to pass, because the humans were not afraid. They had been waiting for this moment, and the sky above Earth was about to fill with silent ships. The Falari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system in general. Vexenar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he surveyed the primitive civilization before him. There was the small blue planet called Earth, home to 8 billion of these soft creatures. There were the tiny colonies on the moon, and on the red planet they called Mars, there were the scattered stations and probes drifting through the void, each one broadcasting signals that the Falari had easily intercepted and decoded. It was exactly as the scouts had reported, a civilization barely taking its first steps beyond its homeworld. Completely unprepared for what was about to happen to them, Vexenar ordered his fleet to take position in high orbit above the planet, arranging his 14 warships in a formation designed to inspire maximum terror in those watching from below. He knew the humans could see them. Their primitive telescopes and sensors would be going wild right now, trying to understand what had suddenly appeared in their sky. He gave them 6 hours to panic before he made contact when he finally opened communications, broadcasting on every frequency the humans used. He made sure his image was transmitted along with his words. He wanted them to see what they were dealing with. He wanted them to see the size of his fangs, the length of his claws, the cold intelligence in his predator eyes. "I am General Vexenar of the Falari Dominion," he announced. his voice carrying across a world. "Your planet and your species are now under our authority, and you will send representatives to discuss the terms of your integration." The response came faster than he expected, a single voice, calm and measured, speaking the Falari language with surprising accuracy. "We acknowledge your presence, General, and we are prepared to meet with you to discuss terms. And we will send an ambassador to the coordinates you specify." Vexinar was mildly impressed by their composure, but he attributed it to ignorance. They simply did not understand yet what they were facing. He chose a landing site in a remote desert on one of their larger continents, a place where his shuttle would not be observed by too many of the local population. He did not want panic spreading before the negotiations were complete. He wanted an orderly surrender, not a chaotic one. The Falari delegation landed at precisely the agreed time, and General Vexinar descended the ramp with 12 of his finest warriors at his back. Their ceremonial armor gleamed in the harsh sunlight, and their movements were fluid. With the grace of predators who had never known fear, the humans sent one man. He stood alone in the middle of the desert, a small figure dwarfed by the towering Falari warriors who surrounded him. He was middle-aged by human standards, neither tall nor particularly impressive. In any physical way, he wore simple gray clothing and carried nothing that looked like a weapon. He introduced himself as Ambassador Chun, and he smiled, far more than Vexinar thought appropriate for someone in his position. "Welcome to Earth, General," Chun said, and his voice held no trace of the fear that should have been there. "We have prepared a meeting area nearby if you would like to discuss terms in comfort." Vexinar studied the human with the careful attention of a predator assessing prey. There was something odd about this one, something that did not quite fit the profile of a terrified, primitive meeting his conquerors for the first time. But Vexinar dismissed the feeling humans were emotional creatures according to the reports, prone to irrational optimism and denial in the face of overwhelming odds. This one was probably just too stupid to understand the danger he was in. The negotiations took place in a simple structure the humans had erected in the desert, nothing more than walls and a roof to block the sun and wind. Vexinar presented the standard terms of integration. The humans would immediately surrender all military assets. They would provide a complete census of their population for work allocation. They would transfer control of all planetary resources to Falari administrators in exchange. They would be allowed to continue existing as a client species under the protection of the Dominion. It was more than fair. Most species received far worse terms, and many received no terms at all. Just annihilation, Ambassador. Chun listened to everything. With that strange calm smile on his face, he nodded at appropriate moments. He asked clarifying questions that showed he understood exactly what was being demanded. He took notes on a small electronic device, and when Vexinar finished laying out the terms, Chum said the words that ignited the general's fury. "I understand your position completely, General, and I will need to consult with my superiors before we can provide a formal response." Vexinar felt his fur bristle with irritation. "You misunderstand the nature of this meeting, Ambassador, and this is not a negotiation where both parties have equal standing." "Of course not," Chine agreed pleasantly. "But I am not authorized to make decisions on behalf of all humanity without consultation. And I am sure you can appreciate the need for proper process." "Process," Vexinar repeated, and the word came out as a growl. He had conquered 11 worlds and not once had any species dared to delay him with talk of process, not once had any representative failed to immediately grovel and beg for whatever mercy he was willing to offer. This human was either very brave or very stupid, and Vexinar suspected the latter. "Let me make our position absolutely clear," the general said. Rising to his full height, he towered over the human by nearly 2 feet, and his shadow fell across Chun like a promise of violence. Your species has no choice in this matter. And the terms I have presented are not suggestions. And there will be no consultation, because there is nothing to consult about. He extended his claws, letting them catch the light, letting the human see exactly what kind of creature he was dealing with. You will accept our terms, or your world will burn, and I have destroyed 11 civilizations that made the mistake of defiance, and I will not hesitate to make yours the 12th. Ambassador Chun looked at the claws. He looked at the massive Falari warriors standing behind their general. He looked at the situation he was in, alone and unarmed against beings who could tear him apart in seconds, and he did not stop smiling. General Vexnar, I strongly advise you to reconsider any violent action, because the consequences would be severe. Something in Vexnar snapped. 3,000 years of Falari dominance had taught him one lesson above all others, and that lesson was that the weak did not threaten the strong. The weak begged. The weak surrendered. The weak knew their place. This human clearly needed to be taught. He struck without warning. One swift motion that was almost too fast for human eyes to track, his claws raked across Chun's chest, tearing through fabric and flesh, drawing bright red blood that splattered across the floor. The ambassador stumbled backward, clutching his wounds, and finally, the smile disappeared from his face. There, Vexnar said with satisfaction. Now you understand what you are dealing with. And now you will go back to your superiors with my message written on your body. And you will tell them that. He stopped. Chun had looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Vexnar had never seen before in any conquered species. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was something that looked almost like pity. General, the human said quietly, blood seeping between his fingers. You really should not have done that. And then the sky changed. General Vexnar turned toward the entrance of the meeting structure, and what he saw through the open doorway stopped him cold. The sky was full of ships. They had not been there a moment ago. He was certain of that because his tactical implants were connected to sensors that monitored everything within 1,000 miles, and those sensors had shown clear empty sky just seconds before. But now there were hundreds of vessels hanging in the air. No, not hundreds, thousands, filling the horizon in every direction like a swarm of dark geometric shapes blocking out the sun. And they made no sound at all, no engine roar, no atmospheric disturbance, no hum of power systems or whine of anti-gravity drives. They simply hung there in absolute silence. And somehow that silence was more terrifying than any weapon. This charge could have been Vexnar's warriors had drawn their weapons, but they stood frozen, unsure what to do, unsure how to respond to something that should not have been possible. What is this? Vexnar demanded, though his voice had lost some of its commanding edge. What kind of trickery? His communication implants screamed with incoming alerts, and he accessed the fleet channel to hear his second-in-command's voice, panicked and crackling with interference. General, we are surrounded. They came from nowhere. There are thousands of them. Our shields are not responding. Our weapons are offline. General, what do we? The transmission cut off. Vexnar tried to reconnect, but there was only static where his fleet should have been. Ambassador Chun had straightened up despite his wounds. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that had not been there during the negotiations. 200 years ago, we intercepted our first Falari transmission, Chun said. It was a military communication, a routine report about the conquest of a world called Desser Prime. And we learned something very important from that transmission. He took a step toward Vexnar, and despite the blood soaking his shirt, despite the size difference between them, it was the general who stepped back. We learned that we were not alone in the universe. And we learned that the universe was full of predators, and we learned exactly what happened to species who were not strong enough to defend themselves. Outside, the silent ships had begun to move, descending through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their shadows sweeping across the desert like the coming of night. So we began to prepare. Chum pressed a hand to his wound, not in pain but almost absently, as if the injury was a minor inconvenience rather than a serious threat. We knew that if we revealed our true capabilities, species like yours would see us as a threat to be eliminated before we could grow stronger, so we hid everything. That is impossible, Vexnar said. Though his voice sounded uncertain even to himself, our scouts surveyed your entire system, and we tracked every spacecraft, every satellite, every signal you produced. You tracked what we wanted you to track. Chun replied. You saw the chemical rockets and the primitive space stations and the divided nations fighting over scraps of territory. And you saw exactly what we designed for you to see. He gestured toward the ships outside, toward the vast armada that had materialized from nothing. Meanwhile, we built our real fleet in the dark places, in the spaces between dimensions that your science has not discovered yet. In facilities beneath the surfaces of moons and asteroids that your probes never got close enough to detect. Vexinar's tactical implants were still trying to analyze the ships outside, and the data they returned made no sense. The vessels registered on some sensors and not others. Their hull compositions matched no known materials. Their NG signatures fluctuated in patterns that violated basic physics. How many? He found himself asking, how many ships do you have? Chun tilted his head slightly, considering the question. In this system alone, approximately 12,000 combat-capable vessels, and we have similar forces stationed in 187 other star systems. 187. We have been busy. A sound reached them from outside. The whine of shuttle engines, but these were not Falari shuttles. Human craft were landing in the desert, disgorging soldiers in armor that looked nothing like the primitive military equipment the scouts had reported. These soldiers moved with professional precision, establishing a perimeter around the meeting structure, their weapons trained on Vexinar's warriors. Your fleet has been captured, Chen continued. All 14 vessels, all crew members, all weapon systems, and it happened in approximately 30 seconds. And not a single shot was fired. Vexinar thought of the Silent Pounce. His flagship, his home for the past 20 years. He thought of his trophy collection, his memories of conquest, his carefully cultivated reputation as the greatest general of his generation. You will kill us then, he said, and he was surprised to find that his voice was steady. You will make an example of us to frighten other species. Chun shook his head. No, General. And that is the difference between your species and mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. Pressing it against his wound, the bleeding stopped almost immediately as the device sealed the damaged tissue. We could destroy you, Chun said. Right now, in this moment, we could wipe out your entire fleet, bombard your homeworld from orbit, and hunt down every Falari colony until your species exists only in historical records. He put the device away and met Vexnar's eyes directly. But we will not do that, because destruction is easy and construction is hard, because revenge satisfies the moment but leaves nothing for the future, because we learned a very long time ago that the measure of a civilization is not how effectively it can kill, but how wisely it chooses not to. Vexinar did not understand. His entire worldview was built on the simple truth that the strong conquered the weak. And here was a species stronger than the Falari choosing to show mercy. It did not make sense. What do you want from us? He asked, and it was the first time in his life he had asked that question of anyone. We want you to choose, Chun said. Right now, in this moment, your species stands at a crossroads, and one path leads to war. A war you cannot win. A war that would cost millions of lives on both sides before it ended with your complete defeat. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The other path leads somewhere different. Somewhere better. To trade and cooperation and mutual growth. To a future where Falari and humans work together instead of fighting each other. And if we choose war, Chun's expression did not change, but something in his eyes grew colder. Then, we will do what is necessary to protect ourselves and every other species your empire has threatened. And we will not enjoy it, and we will mourn every life lost on both sides, but we will not hesitate, and we will not stop until the threat is eliminated. He spread his hands, a gesture that somehow encompassed both the armada outside and the entire galaxy beyond. But I hope you will be wiser than that, General, because I have studied your species, and I believe there is more to the Falari than conquest and domination. And I believe you are capable of being better than your history suggests. Vexenar looked at the human standing before him. Small and soft and bleeding, surrounded by the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, General Vexenar of the 3rd Claw Fleet did not know what to do. The detention facility was not what Vexenar had expected when the Falari captured enemy commanders. They kept them in small dark cells designed to break the spirit and remind the prisoner of their complete powerlessness. The humans gave Vexenar a suite of rooms with windows, overlooking a garden, with comfortable furniture sized for his larger frame, with access to books and entertainment and communication with his captured crew. It was unsettling. A Falari officer came to visit him on the 3rd day, a young female named Syrah, who had served aboard one of his escort vessels. She looked confused and frightened, though not in the way he expected. General, I do not understand what is happening, she said, her fur rippling with anxiety. They have not harmed any of us, and they feed us well and treat our injuries and answer our questions. And they keep asking if we need anything. They are trying to manipulate us, Vexenar said, though he was no longer certain of that. But why? And to what end? He did not have an answer. Over the following weeks, Vexenar learned more about humanity than all the Falari scouts had discovered in their years of observation. Human officers came to speak with him, not to interrogate but to explain, to share information, to treat him as a guest rather than a prisoner. He learned that humans had developed faster than light travel 3 generations ago and had deliberately hidden it while they expanded. In secret, he learned that their fractured nations and petty wars were theater, a performance maintained specifically for alien observers who might be watching. He learned that they had already encountered 17 other aggressive species and had dealt with each one differently depending on the circumstances. Most of them are all allies now, explained Admiral Morrison, a small human woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had been assigned to answer his questions. The Voltrani were similar to your people, conquerors who believed strength was the only law. And it took us 40 years to help them understand there was another way. Help them, Vexenar repeated, tasting the strange phrase. Yes, help them. Because they were not evil, General, and they were simply operating according to the values their evolution and history had given them. And we believed they were capable of change, and the ones who were not capable of change. Morrison's expression flickered with something that might have been sadness. The Kreth swarm refused all attempts at communication, and they attacked every ship we sent. And they destroyed 3 human colonies before we could stop them. What happened to them? They no longer exist. The words were delivered without emotion, without pride or satisfaction, just a simple statement of fact that carried more weight than any boast could have. We do not enjoy killing, Morrison continued. We find no glory in destruction, and we mourn every life we take, even the lives of our enemies. But we also refuse to allow ourselves or others to be victims of those who cannot be reasoned with. Vexenar thought about the Kreth swarm. a species he had never heard of, erased from existence by creatures the Falari had dismissed as harmless primitives. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your people are about to make a choice," Morrison said. "The same choice we offered to every species in your position. And I want you to understand what both options truly mean." Word of the disaster had reached the Falari homeworld by now. Vexinar had been allowed to send a message explaining what had happened, and he had done so with complete honesty, describing the human fleet, the capture of his ships. The offer that had been made, the High Pride, was in chaos. Some demanded immediate war, calling for every Falari warship to converge on human space and avenge this humiliation. Others pointed out that if the humans could capture the Third Claw Fleet without firing a shot, war would be suicide. Vexinar received regular updates on the debate, and he watched his people tear themselves apart trying to decide between their pride and their survival. "What would you do?" he asked Morrison one day. "If you were in my position, if you were a Falari general watching your empire face this choice." She considered the question carefully. "I would ask myself what kind of future I wanted for my people. And I would ask myself whether conquest and domination had truly made the Falari happy. And I would look at the species you have subjugated and ask whether that was the legacy I wanted to leave. We are predators," Vexinar said. "It is our nature to hunt and to dominate, and asking us to change is asking us to stop being what we are." "No," Morrison replied, and there was something gentle in her voice. "It is asking you to become what you could be. And there is a difference." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden below where Falari and human prisoners walked together under the watchful eyes of guards who seemed more interested in preventing fights than in exerting control. "Your ancestors evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. And that environment shaped your psychology, your culture, your entire way of seeing the universe. But you are not on that world anymore." She turned back to face him. "You have technology that can create abundance from scarcity, and you have the power to shape your own evolution. And the question is whether you will choose to remain slaves to instincts that were useful 10,000 years ago, or whether you will grow beyond them." Vexinar had no response to that. He had spent his entire life believing that strength and dominance were the highest virtues, that the universe respected only power, that mercy was weakness and compassion was foolishness. But sitting in this comfortable room, treated with dignity, he had never extended to any conquered species. He found those beliefs crumbling. The humans were clearly stronger than the Falari. They had proven that beyond any doubt, and yet they chose mercy. They chose patience. They chose to offer a hand instead of a claw. Perhaps Vexinar began to think he had been wrong about what strength truly meant. Perhaps the ability to destroy was not strength at all. Perhaps true strength lay in the ability to choose not to destroy, even when destruction would be easy a week later. He requested permission to send another message to the High Pride. This time, he did not merely report what had happened. He told them what he had learned. He told them about the human philosophy of strength, about the futures they offered to former enemies, about the genuine kindness he had been shown despite the blood he had drawn from Ambassador Chen. He told them that surrender was not defeat but opportunity, that changing was not weakness but wisdom, that the Falari could become something greater than they had ever been if they had the courage to take the hand that was being offered. He did not know if they would listen, but for the first time in his life, Vexinar hoped. 20 years had passed since the day General Vexinar had attacked Ambassador Chen in a desert on Earth. The galaxy had changed in ways that the old Vexinar could never have imagined. And he had changed along with it. He stood now on the observation deck of Concordance Station, a massive structure built in neutral space by human and Falari engineers working side by side through the transparent walls. He could see a joint fleet conducting training exercises. Sleek Falari warships moving in perfect formation with the strange silent vessels of the human armada. His fur had gone silver with age, and the ceremonial scars he once wore with pride had faded to pale lines barely visible beneath his coat. He no longer thought of them as marks of honor. Now they reminded him of a person he had been, a creature operating on incomplete information, a predator who had mistaken cruelty for strength, still watching the fleet. Old friend. Vexenar turned to see Ambassador Chung approaching across the observation deck. The human had aged as well. His hair fully gray now, his face lined with the years. But his smile was exactly as Vexenar remembered it from their first meeting. I find it calming, Vexenar admitted. Watching them work together, seeing what we have built. And I never tire of it. Chun joined him at the viewport, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. Two old enemies who had become something like friends. The delegation from the Vorn Collective arrives tomorrow, Chun said. They are nervous about meeting the Falari. Given your history with their region of space, Vexenar nodded slowly. The Vorn had been among the species the Falari had conquered in the old days. Their homeworld still bearing the scars of orbital bombardment from a campaign Vexenar himself had commanded. I will speak with them, he said. I will tell them what I did and why I did it and how wrong I was. And I will not ask for forgiveness because I do not deserve it. But I will show them what the Falari have become and let them judge whether that is enough. That is all anyone can do, Chun agreed. Acknowledge the past, learn from it, and try to build something better. They watched a human cruiser and a Falari destroyer execute a complex maneuver together. Their movements synchronized despite their vastly different designs. I think about that day sometimes, Vexenar said. The day I attacked you, and I remember the look in your eyes when the ships appeared. And you were not surprised at all, Chun chuckled softly. No, I was not surprised, because I knew they were there. Because I knew what would happen if you chose violence. And I hoped you would not, but I was prepared for the possibility. Why did you come alone? And why did you put yourself at such risk when you had an armada hidden in the sky? Because we wanted to give your people every possible chance to make the right choice, Chun said. And because showing up with warships would have triggered the very response we were trying to avoid. And because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is appear weak. Vexenar considered this 20 years ago. He would have seen it as foolishness, as the reasoning of prey too stupid to understand how the universe worked. Now he understood it as the deepest form of strength. The willingness to risk everything on the hope that violence could be avoided. How many times have you done this? He asked. How many species have you faced in that same position? Chum was quiet for a long moment. 23, he finally said. 18 chose peace, and 2 were already at war with other civilizations, and we helped negotiate settlements. And 3, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Vexenar knew what happened to the 3. He had seen the records. The careful documentation humans kept of every life lost in their conflicts. The memorials they built to their enemies, as well as their own dead. Does it get easier? He asked. Making that choice, offering peace when you know you might have to wage war. No, Chun said simply. It never gets easier, and it should not get easier. Because the moment it becomes easy to destroy is the moment we lose the right to call ourselves civilized. A formation of Falari fighters swept past the viewport. Young pilots showing off for the human crews watching from nearby. Vexenar felt a strange pride watching them. Not the pride of conquest he had once known, but something different. Something warmer. The old high pride would have executed me for treason, he said. When I sent that message urging peace, they wanted my head. And there were assassination attempts in the early years. And now they call me the bridge builder. And young Falari officers study my campaigns, not as examples to follow, but as warnings of what we once were. He turned to face Chun directly. I was the greatest general of my generation. And I conquered 11 worlds, and I collected trophies from the dead and dying. And I believed I was strong. His claws, retracted now, twitched with remembered shame. I was not strong. And I was afraid of weakness, afraid of change, afraid of anything that challenged what I believed about myself and my people. And I called that fear strength because I did not know the difference. Chum put a hand on Vexenar's arm, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 2 decades ago. The fact that you can say that now, that you can look at who you were and recognize it clearly, that is strength. And it is the kind of strength that actually matters. A message alert chimed, and Chun glanced at his communicator. I need to go prepare for the Vorn delegation. But there is something I have been meaning to give you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. Pressing it into Vexenar's paw, it was a medal, human in design, bearing an inscription in both human and Falari script for service to peace. Vexenar read aloud. For the courage to change. The Concordance Council voted unanimously, Chun said. You have earned it, old friend. He smiled one last time and walked away, leaving Vexenar alone on the observation deck with the medal in his paw and the fleet. Moving silently beyond the viewport, the galaxy was still, full of dangers. There were species out there who would need to learn the same lessons the Falari had learned, some through patience and some through force, but the humans would face those challenges as they had faced all others, with hidden strength and offered hands and the quiet certainty that peace was always worth fighting for. Vexenar looked at the medal, at the words engraved upon it, and he thought about the journey that had brought him from conqueror to ambassador. He had attacked a human once, thinking himself powerful, thinking himself strong, and the sky had filled with silent ships, and everything he believed had been proven wrong. But from that moment of failure, something new had grown, not conquest, but partnership. Not domination, but cooperation. Not the strength of the claw, but the strength of the open hand. The old Vexenar would have seen it as weakness. The new Vexenar understood it was the only kind of strength that truly mattered. He placed the medal against his chest, feeling its weight, and watched the joint fleet move through the stars. Somewhere out there, another young civilization was looking up at the sky for the first time, wondering if they were alone. They would learn soon enough that they were not, and when they did, humanity would be there to meet them, with open hands, with patient hearts, with silent ships waiting in the dark, hoping they would never need to be used, and with the certainty, proven across millennia and 100 different species, that there was always a better way. The end.